Good morning and welcome to the Art of a Life Well Lived. I am Christine Regan Lake and it's good to be back here again. Today I'm going to be talking about 5 kinds of childhood trauma. and if you like my videos, I would love it if you hit the like button or wanted to share it with those you think might find value in it, or subscribe to my channel, any of those things. I try to get out 2 videos a week. If I can do more, I will, but at this point, that's about what I can handle with all the other things going on I have in my life, which is all good stuff. Okay, so let's get going. So, the 5 kinds of childhood trauma. Now, the first thing that I want to say about childhood trauma is that a lot of people have the misconception that unless you had, like, a violent parent that beat you, you really didn't have like a traumatic childhood. What's important to understand is for the childhood brain, for the child that is in growing up in an environment, they are very impacted by everything that's going around them. And they're also, for the first years of their life, they are in kind of that hypnotic state where it's kind of they're really observing everything around them, and so much of what is going on in their environment is being absorbed by their subconscious mind, and their subconscious mind is integrating things and processing things all at the subconscious level in a hypnotic state, which is why even small incidences that can unfold in a child's life can be quite traumatic. Like a parent shutting them down, yelling at them, being late for picking them up at the school, whatever it is. So it's important to understand that trauma to a child is very different than what an adult would consider a traumatic experience. Okay, so the 5 kinds of traumas. So the first trauma is rejection trauma. So rejection trauma has a deep impact on a child, and what it can do is it can make people who are on the receiving end of an experience in their childhood that made them feel rejected. They can be hypersensitive to any kind of criticism. They develop a low self-esteem, and when someone has been rejected, they have a very, very hard time trusting people, and they don't want to let anyone in. They also, you'll find that people who have struggled with rejection trauma in their childhood, typically they will reject people first. So if they're in a relationship and they get even the slightest whiff that there's something maybe going on with their partner and things like that, they'll end the relationship. What they want to do is they want to reject the other person before the person rejects them. Their feeling is that if they're in control, if they're the one doing the rejection, it's better for me to break up with someone than to have someone break up with me. That would be harder. So I'm going to break up with them before they can break up with me. It's a very standard pattern that someone can fall into who has had rejection rejection experiences in their childhood. And the other thing is, like, it's amazing, but like, it's not just your parents. You could feel rejection from not being picked for the kickball team. You could feel rejection for, several friends wanting to go out to, some kind of experience, or you weren't invited to a birthday party. So feelings of rejection, the human psyche is very sensitive. Our ego is very tender. And so we can be deeply wounded by things where people didn't necessarily mean to, hurt us or things like that. So it's important to be aware. So if you notice that, if you feel that you might struggle with rejection trauma, that you have that pattern of breaking up with friends, or breaking up with boyfriends, girlfriends, or whatever before they're going to break up with you, you might want to explore what were some of the incidences in your childhood that could have had deep feelings of rejection, and really kind of work on neutralizing that wound. Because one of the other things, like, if you have that rejection trauma and you don't let anyone in, you can't develop those deep, nourishing, soul nourishing friendships and intimate connections, because you won't let anybody in. You keep everybody at an arm's distance, because you don't want to let them in, have them reject you, and then get hurt. And so you protect yourself by just kind of walling yourself off. Okay, so the next one is injustice trauma. So injustice trauma could be an experience where you feel like that something unjust happened to you. And I'll share a little story with you, like it from my own life. So I remember with my mom, for some reason, my family jokes that my mom always had to blame someone, right? So I one day I was watching TV in my parents' bedroom, and for whatever reason, that was the day that the clock decided to break. I don't know. It was the kind like that actually like flipped over, had the little paper numbers and they flipped over or whatever. For whatever reason, that's the day that the clock decided to die. And later that afternoon, my mother came up or whatever, and she was like, "What did you do to the clock?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "The clock is broken." And I'm like, "I didn't touch the clock." And so I was just blamed. Like, and the funny thing about this is that this clock story, like for the rest of my life, my mom and I were like, my mom's like, "You broke the clock." I'm like, "I never touched the clock." I would get so angry. I remember being like, "I didn't touch the damn clock," whatever. And I felt such injustice because I was blamed for something that I didn't do. I was completely innocent. I didn't do anything. The clock just died, but somehow I got blamed. Even my sisters later told me they were too. Like, they were sitting there talking to each other. They're like, "Why won't she just own up to it? Why won't she just tell mom she broke the clock?" They believed my mother. Nobody believed me that I didn't break the clock. So anyway, if you struggle with injustice trauma, you may have had an experience like that. And when you've had an injustice trauma, what that can trigger then for you is feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, because you're like, well, no matter what I do, I'm wrong anyway, or whatever I do, nothing ever changes. You feel like life is unjust. Like, I work really hard, but I work for a boss who won't acknowledge my worth and value, and I won't get a pay raise and things like that. So that can instill deep feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, which is very detrimental. Feelings of hopelessness is very, very detrimental to your self-esteem. It makes you feel disempowered. It makes it much harder for you to take action to change your life. And you also feel that because you feel like because you feel like the world isn't a just place, you feel very unsafe. So you will kind of walk around in a perpetual state of anxiety and worry because you don't feel safe, and you're like, well, things aren't just in the world. And so it just creates this kind of low level anxiety that you walk around with. And and it all can also make you more moody and irritable because you feel like, I tried to do the right thing, but it doesn't turn out for me. And so it just spirals into this very negative downward spiral of helplessness and hopelessness, feeling overwhelmed, anxious, unsafe. And of course, you're moody and irritable because you feel like you don't have any control over your life. And when you don't feel that you have control over your life, one, it creates a tremendous amount of anxiety and worry, but it also creates anger, because who wants to feel like life is being forced upon them and that you have no control over any area of your life to, bring about the things that you wish and want for your life? So if you struggle with injustice trauma, you might want to go back to your early childhood wounds and experiences and think about what were the instances that made you feel helpless. When were times with either your parents, your teachers, your friends, or whatever, where you were put in a situation where you felt like something was truly unjust and that you got the short end of the stick? And work to maybe consider the other person's perspective on that. That's part of the healing process, is to put yourself in the other person's shoes and think, well, what could they possibly have been thinking when they said this or did this or whatever, and really try to release that experience. Because if you really want to heal that injustice wound, if you want to step out of and get out of the pattern and the rhythm of feeling like helpless and hopeless in your own life, because you do have the power to make change. It's up to you. And you just have to go back to the source of the wounds that make you feel like you are helpless, because you are not helpless. Okay, what's the third one? So the third one is abandonment trauma. So people who feel like they were abandoned, this could be a child who, maybe had to become a parent too soon, in the sense that, their mother and father were always working. And so they had to step up and do adult responsibilities as a child. I knew someone, family who owned apartment buildings at a very young age, was responsible for like the checking account and doing all this other stuff. And so they had adult responsibilities forced upon them at a very young age. And so they, not only were they robbed of their childhood, but they felt abandoned by their parents because they were being forced to do parental roles. Or if a parent forces the child to be the adult in terms of, so say a parent, a husband and wife get divorced, and all of a sudden, the mother starts expecting her oldest son to be her emotional confidant, and to be the backbone support, as if, to step up and be like the spouse in that scenario. Not sexually, I don't mean that at all. I don't mean anything inappropriate like that. I just mean from an emotional standpoint, or from the standpoint of household, like just putting too much responsibilities on her son to kind of fill the role of the husband that's no longer there. And anyone who would do this, it's obviously done at this, at a very, unconscious level. They would, I don't believe any mother or father is going to consciously know that they're doing that, but that's what happens, right? So sometimes when there is a divorce and there's one, partner missing, then the parent, out of loneliness, turns to their children to have the children try to fill the void of just having like a confidant, a person, stuff like that, or just someone to go pal around with and stuff like that. And they place their emotional response, like they put their emotion on their children, like it's their children's job to make them happy, or to fill the gap of the spouse not being there. So what does that result in if you have an abandonment issues? Well, it ends up with low self-esteem. You think everyone's going to abandon you. You feel left out, and you may feel like, just no one shows up for you, whether it's your friends or your bosses and things. And then you will start recreating those scenarios in your interpersonal relationships, your job scenarios, things like that, right? Because when we have a belief about something, that's what we draw to us. What you think about, you bring about. So abandonment issues, if you know that you struggle with abandonment issues, definitely go back, look, write down all the experiences in your childhood where you remember feeling like left out, abandoned, where you felt like your parents who should have showed up for you for this, that, or whatever. Any of those scenarios, write them all down. Again, try to step into their shoes to see to try to understand the context of where they were coming from, what was going on in the environment at the time, so that you can look at it from an adult perspective, as opposed to like the 3-year-old perspective or the 4-year-old's perspective of when it happened to you, because you were processing, everything was being absorbed subconsciously, and so your subconscious mind was coming up with all these definitions and connections and making parallels about what this must mean. And usually those definitions that we create and the meaning we placed on it are completely, skewed. They're anti-life. They are, and they do a lot of damage. So you really want to understand where your feelings and thoughts are around that. Okay. So what's the next trauma? The next trauma is the neglect trauma. So if you feel that there were like literally like emotionally neglected, physically neglected in some capacity, mentally, neglected, where there was no engagement with your parents, there was no emotional connection, there was no, it was just your emotional needs weren't getting met. You can have a very hard time letting things go. You can hold on to anger. It will impact if you feel like you're neglected, you will more than likely have developed the belief that you were neglected because you weren't worthy, you weren't loved, which can create feelings of I'm unlovable, things like that. So it affects low self-esteem. People who have been neglected tend to think they have to hustle and earn their love, so they will normally have a very hard time saying no. So they'll start saying yes when it's no, to help people, to bend over backwards, to do all these different things. And they're doing it because they don't have any healthy boundaries. They don't have healthy boundaries around, does this work for me? Is this alignment with what I want? You know what I mean? Things like that. So they have a very hard time Sorry, I had to adjust I've got a little electromedicine machine on. um, so they can't say no. They say yes to things, which when you say yes, when it's really no, it builds up tremendous feelings of resentment within yourself, because you know you're violating your boundaries. You know that you don't want to do it, and you're doing it anyway because you feel like, if I don't do this, then I'm not going to get the love that I need. So you end up agreeing to things that really aren't what you want to be doing. And then the challenge around that is that, when you're doing that with someone you love, right, because you don't have those personal boundaries, and you're saying to people, okay, yes, I'll do this or whatever. The problem is that when you do that over and over and over again, you build up incredible feelings of resentment, but you end up starting to resent that person, and you can end up hating that person. And really, it's your own fault because you don't have the healthy boundaries. It's not their fault if you don't know how to set your healthy boundaries. They don't know it's no unless you say no. If you're saying yes, they think you're okay with it. Okay, so another thing that happens when you have neglect trauma is that you repress your emotions. You have a very uncomfortable time trying to express your feelings, to speak how you're feeling, being vulnerable, being vulnerable, and opening up that soft underbelly to someone is incredibly terrifying, and you won't do it because you you can't trust, because your emotional needs were not met as a child. You're assuming they're not going to be met by this person, so you won't open up and you won't be vulnerable because you don't want to open up, share the wounding of your heart and soul, to have someone not listen, not care, not take the time and things like that. So it's very important, if you do have those feelings of neglect from a child where your emotional needs were not met as a child, go back, you might want to work with someone, do energy release work, whatever you need to do, because that's a deep one. All of these obviously have deep impacts on our lives, on our emotional well-being and things like that. So you definitely want to address it, because you deserve to open up your heart and to be able to connect with another human being, to allow them in, to share your vulnerabilities and allow them to show up and be there for you. Okay, so what's the fifth one? The fifth one is betrayal trauma. So betrayal trauma is really, really rough, because when someone feels as though they have been betrayed. So what would be potentially one way that someone is betrayed? So say your mom and dad are fighting, and now all of a sudden they bring you into, one of your parents triangulates you and brings you into the fight, and all of a sudden, like, your mother might say to the child, tell your father why you're scared of him, or whatever. So your mom and dad are having a fight. One of you brings you into the fight to try to show the other one that, see, I'll show you why you're wrong and why you're blah 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 here. And then they put the child on the spot to pick a side. You can feel incredibly betrayed. And there's a million ways that you can feel betrayed. That's just one example of what I was trying to say in terms of like feeling betrayed by your parent or whatever. Is that someone who is supposed to protect you all of a sudden brings you in the middle of a fight and now makes you the enemy of the other parent. That's just one example. So if you struggle with betrayal, it will be very, very difficult for you to trust people. You will also find that there's a lot of emotional confusion. People who have betrayal trauma have a very hard time processing and identifying, like, what am I feeling, and then how to recognize what they're feeling, to express what they're feeling, and also in terms of like managing their emotions. So they can get completely overwhelmed, so they don't know how to process what they're feeling. They can't even identify necessarily what is the emotional state. They're just feeling like things bubble up inside of them, and they don't really know how to articulate what they're feeling. And then all of a sudden they can explode, right? So they have a very difficult time managing your emotions, right? Because if you've been betrayed, that's going to trigger huge feelings of injustice, where you get really angry, because when we feel like we've been betrayed and someone violated our boundaries in some way, it can create incredible feelings of anger, and that builds up inside of us. And then all of a sudden you have like an overreaction, you get like really angry, start yelling or being attacking and things like that. So Emotional confusion and challenges with, managing your emotions would be one of those things. The next one is that if you have betrayal trauma, you will feel it will create tremendous feelings of anxiety and depression, because you don't know who to trust, right? And then so if one person has betrayed you, well, how do I know this another person isn't going to betray me? How do I know the next person I date isn't going to betray me, cheat on me, lie to me, steal my money, like whatever it is for you, right? And so that it can create like a spiral of anxiety depression, like you're anxious because you seek connection and you want to connect with people, but depression because you have a hard time opening up, you don't know how you feel about things, like it's just a swirl of emotions, and it can be an anxiety depression, kind of a spiral back and forth between anxiety and depression, struggling to really feel like how am I going to move forward in the world when I can't trust. Because when you've been betrayed, it like you start looking at everyone cross-eyed, right? Like, so you're kind of like, if someone betrayed you at work, all of a sudden you start dating someone, like betrayal it goes very, very deep into the emotional body, and it can be quite challenging to overcome. But you want to really look at those experiences from your early childhood of when you felt like you were betrayed in some capacity, and really try to heal and release that. Because you really can't build anything if you want a healthy marriage, if you want a healthy relationship, if you want deep, resonating, connected friendships, coworkers, at work, if you have employees, if you're a business owner, or if you're a manager, you want to be able to trust people. And because it's a terrible way to walk around when you're just in this hyper vigilant state of defense, always kind of on the lookout, like, is that person trustworthy, is that someone I can trust? It's a very low vibrating state to just walk around in a perpetual state of mistrust for everyone out there. And these kind of emotions, that resonant spiral between like anxiety and depression, can physically make you sick and can give you stomach pain, stomach problems, ulcers, things like that. So it's emotional pain, emotional trauma. There's a direct connection between emotional pain and trauma and physical health challenges. And so if you know that you have certain health challenges, you know, I I have to be honest with you, learning EFT over 15 years ago was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, because it really taught me the language of the body, and it taught me how to connect with and listen to my body. And if you have physical pain in your body, I would encourage you to lay down, get quiet, connect with that pain, and actually start talking to it and be like, what is this? What is this about? I'll share a story with you. So when I was living in Arizona, I had decided to renovate my 2-car garage and make it into an art studio and gallery. And I never, I really don't have back pain. It's just not one of those things that I have on any kind of regular basis. And one day, that day, that they were coming to take out the garage door, and they were going to put in an entire glass wall and glass door, I had tremendous back pain in my lower back, and it was like a 9.5. Out of nowhere, just woke up with it. And once I got the guys settled and they started doing their work, I said, you know what, I'm going to go lay down. I'm not feeling too good right now. I'll come out in a little bit and check on you and see how you're doing. So I went and I laid down and I got quiet, and then I just focused on the back pain. And I literally just said to the pain, what is this? Where's this coming from? And what came up was, I'm scared. What if we spend all this money renovating this, art studio, and nobody likes your work? Nobody responds to your art. And so I was scared of putting myself out there, that I was spending all this money and I'm going to put my artwork out there, and my art comes from my soul. So it was feeling, so as I looked at past experiences that maybe didn't go the way I thought they would, it was incredibly scary for me to put myself out there and share my artwork with people, and to even though I had all this pain and I had all this fear, even though one of my life goals was to have a beautiful art studio gallery, one day, and here I was in the midst of building it, and had tremendous pain in my lower back because I was afraid of all of these things, right? I was afraid that I was going to put my art up there and nobody would like it, and my art would be rejected. My soul would be rejected. That is the way I was viewing it. So that's what I mean by the connection between the physical pain in the body and your emotions, what's going on in your emotions. And what happened was that when I connected with that energy, within like 5 minutes, that 9.5 level of pain in my lower back went to like a 1.5, simply because I connected with the pain and I gave it the presence to be heard, and I honored my emotions. Those were emotions that were stuck in my lower back. They were feelings of emotion, like fear of being vulnerable, fear of failure, fear of, spending all this money and what if nobody buys my art? You know what I mean? So that's just what I wanted to share with you. So those are the 5 childhood traumas. It is rejection trauma, injustice trauma, abandonment trauma, neglect trauma, and betrayal trauma. So if any of those resonated with you, I would encourage you to explore the roots of the wounds in your childhood, because you deserve to have a beautiful future. Every emotion you have ever felt in your physical body, every wound you have is sacred. Your wounds are sacred, and they deserve your time and attention, your love and your care to help release them from your body, because that's what happens. There's videos I have that I talk about how the emotions get stuck in the body and things like that. If I can remember, I might put it in the description box. Don't promise me. I'm not going to promise you on that because I have a really crazy day. But anyway, you can always just go through and find it if you wanted to look for it. But basically, every wound you've ever had wants to be heard, seen, felt, and released. And each of us has so many wounds and traumas from our childhood that can be negatively impacting the quality of our life right now. And if you give it the time, attention, love, and care, you would be amazed at the stuff that you can release and, set yourself free. So I hope you have a beautiful day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.